how radio journalism is not just specific to news. When you hear journalism, that's what your mind might automatically go to. But journalism, especially in the radio format, I think, is it's storytelling, it's music, it's sports, and it's just capturing life through sound. So we're going to get things started before introductions with a little bit of sound from voices that are going to be very familiar to you in the next 50 minutes.
Oh, indeed. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Inland Folk. Music is designed to share. You know, it's meant to be passed around and sung and interpreted, and that's what the whole folk thing is all about from the old days.
Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke announced Friday that by the end of the year, he wants a decision made on bringing back grizzlies to the North Cascades. There were once thousands of grizzly bears in the area. Today, there are fewer than 10.
An American story that begins in Vietnam. Second Wave is a production of KUOW in Seattle and PRX. Our producers are Andy Hurst and...
These giant fires move over the landscape and destroy. They take lives, burn up homes, and down fences. But the snow will fly, the fires will cool, spring will come. Good neighbors will find each other and build good fences again. Outside of TWISP, I'm Anna King.
All right. So that voice you just heard was Miss Anna King right here. And she is an alum who has won many awards in her career as a journalist for Northwest News Network, and including the WSU Woman of the Year in 2016. That snippet you just heard was from a story she did about the wildfires that were going on, which also won a lot of awards. So thank you for being here, Anna. Next to her, we have Mr. Tom Cocaine. What's up, Tom? Yes, that's right. You heard his last name correctly. Spelt with a K, and look it up. Tom has done a lot of things. He's pretty much done all aspects of radio. He's done things from managing a station to being an overnight rock DJ. And if you're from this area and you listen to Northwest Public Broadcasting, you'll hear his voice a lot of the time being your host on All Things Considered. Thank you for being here, Tom.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. Next to him, we have Mr. Andy Hurst, whose voice you did not hear in the podcast or in the little snippet. However, he is a producer at KUOW. Not only does he produce podcasts like Second Wave, which is a story about the Vietnamese American experience, but he also produces for the midday news magazine show called The Record. And, fun fact, he was an alum as well. Go Cougs. Thanks for being here, Andy. Of course. And last, but certainly not least, we have Mr. Dan Marr, who also, if you listen to Northwest Public Broadcasting, you've heard his voice for many years. He's been hosting a show, a program, 3-hour-long program, that is called Inland Folk, and it explores folk music, and last year it celebrated its 35th anniversary. So, Mr. Dan Marr, thank you very much for being here.
My real claim to fame is that I was Andy Hurst's advisor for KZUU Radio.
That's true.
Nice.
So a lot of us here go way back and have a lot of ties to radio in some way, shape, or form, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Today's panel is going to be kind of split up into 3 different parts: radio's past, present, and future. So with that being said, we're going to start off with the question, what puts rad into radio for you? In other words, what brought you into the radio realm in the first place? And how about Dan, let's start with you.
The rad in radio is sound. It's audio. It's word. It's voice. It's articulation. The music part is sort of stylistically a cultural thing. It's kind of the backdrop of radio. What really made it for radio, just so that, and I don't want to take a lot of your time, when I was a kid, Gunsmoke was still on radio with William Conrad. And radio drama was a big thing. But also what was happening is there's that crossover between radio and television. So all of your up-and-coming television journalism anchors, Cronkite and Reasoner and Brinkley and Huntley and all of these people that you probably never really heard of, and including Ed Murrow, they all had radio commentaries on their various networks. And I loved to listen to them say things. I loved to listen to what the words meant. And the words, along with these wonderful, wonderful voices, where people paid attention to their intonations and their nuances and their styles, and they created these kinds of things, was amazing to me. And it was just, as a visually impaired person, of course, it was just wonderful to listen to radio. So the rad in radio is just the sound.
We'll go with you, Andy. We'll just go on down the line. Thanks, Dan.
So you've probably heard the term driveway moment before. For me, if I'm watching TV or consuming news in some other way, that kind of thing doesn't really happen. There's been so many times when I'm sitting in my car listening to a story on All Things Considered or listening to This American Life, and I'm just transfixed on the story they're telling me. For me, radio has this ability to shoot right into your ear, right into your brain. It's one person talking to you. And so it's an intimate experience. And, you know, we'll probably get to this later, but the rise of podcasting has proven that it's a powerful medium. And for me, it's being able to communicate directly to one person at a time. And I listen to it, I love it, and that's why I do it too.
Hi. Did everybody have breakfast today? Everybody doing okay? We're all caffeinated? All that good stuff. Yeah, okay. Well, the rad in radio for me came when I was in college, like many of you are now, and Professor Alan Taylor was taking Introduction to Broadcasting, I think it was, and he described radio to me that has always meant it's magic. So the rad in radio is that it's magic, and this is how it's magic. He described how, okay, let's say I tell a story to you, and I say, this morning I got up and I went into my office and my cat left me a present on my favorite chair. Those of you who know about cats, it could be anything from something that they had herked up that morning, or, you know, it depends on your imagination. If you don't have a cat, or maybe you think pleasantly about cats, you think of like a little box with a little bow on it. It left me a little present. This is the magic in radio. I tell you something, but you bring your own experiences to it so that it brings the imagination that you have into your brain. That is the power and magic of radio. What you hear becomes your own pictures in your own mind. I picture something different than you picture it. That's rad.
So the rad in radio for me, I came to radio a little bit later in my career. I was actually a newspaper woman for quite a few years before I got into radio. And as you know, the newspaper industry has had some ebbs and swells as the industry kind of adjusts to the digital market. And when I discovered radio, I was like, man, I was just sketching with a pencil before, and now I can paint in watercolor. It's just so beautiful. You can put somebody's gravelly, scratchy voice on the radio. You don't have to say the guy had a gravelly, scratchy voice. You can hear his coffee and his cigarettes and his voice. And you can put horses' thundering hooves on the radio. You don't have to just write the horses had thundering hooves. You can put that description and knit sound together. And so I really love putting sound under my writing so that there's the writing that I do with the words, and then there's the writing that I do with the sound mixing, and they interplay together. So I'm not explicitly telling you what I'm saying, but I'm layering these sounds like a puzzle underneath the texture of the story so that you can be there with me. And my ultimate joy and the real rad in radio for me is when I'm in a burly pickup truck 35 miles up a dirt road in cowboy boots, and I can tell you a story from there, and you're sitting in your cubicle or your office somewhere in the city, and you're listening to what I'm putting on the radio. And that's really exciting work, and just the service that provides for the listener to bring them news out of remote areas that you can't access every day.
Thank you. And so with what everyone said, you know, the thing about radio, it's a very intimate medium, although it's appealing to the mass audiences. And it's like Tom said, it's very magical. It's like reading a book because you don't have that visual in front of you. So a lot of it is storytelling. So I guess I want to start off with Anna. You've done your fair share of reporting, and the little snippet that we heard earlier today was a story that has a lot more emotion to it than we heard in just that couple of seconds. So can you talk about when you find, first of all, a newsworthy story and just how to bring out emotion in storytelling?
I think that to be a good radio person, you have to be first a good intent listener, and you have to relate to people where you're at. So you're just empathetic to their story, and you just listen very well to what their experience is and what they have to tell you. And eventually, about 35 minutes of talking, they get past all the BS, and they kind of come to the crux of what they're going to tell you. And you have to have faith that you just dump that 35 minutes of tape that you had before about all the facts. You have it in your brain, but really the crux of an interview comes about 35, 45 minutes in, when they've kind of blown past all the whitewash that they had to spin out there, and they kind of pause for a moment, and then they say what they really mean. And waiting and being patient for that moment is really what I think I've tried to hone in my career. And then being able to knit that into something that resonates with people, and to show that this is a complex story. This isn't just black and white issue, but this is the nuance of it. And all country people aren't hicks with a straw in their mouth, and just, that there's nuance in rural places or wherever you're reporting from. So that's what I really try to bring to my reporting, and the emotional resonance just comes when you're an empathetic ear. When you really care about who you're interviewing, they can tell that, and they'll share that with you. And it's kind of this weird dance, like I talk to 2 million people, so people don't know that when they're just sitting there in front of me, and I try to explain that to them, but really you're just having a conversation, and then you're amplifying that conversation. But if you can't connect with the person, you can't get that interview. You don't have the raw material to work with.
If I could add on to that, last night, if you happen to watch or listen to, there he is right there on the picture, right? Sorry, whoops.
Siegel?
Robert Siegel, last night, where he's talking about that very thing where people are, well, I texted them, I emailed them, and they didn't get back to me. Well, did you talk to them? And that's how you can really tell. That's really what you said, is like there's a veneer almost that people have. Like with any conversation, after the first 3 questions, you finally get to what they want to ask or what to say. But you're right. The first 35 minutes is like, okay, that was good. Let's get to the meat of it.
I think the key thing about interviews, though, is to make sure that you get what you need. I do interviews live on television, and those to me are harder because you have X amount of time, you have X amount of whatever, and so the hard part in doing live interviewing is the idea that there's something you want to get across. There's a point you want to get across, but at the same time, you don't want to put words in the interviewee's mouth. So how do you extract that information in less of a time frame than you would normally have? I would love to have 35 minutes of tape to throw away myself. It would be wonderful, but when I do the Jam with Dan, which is a television thing we do, interspersed with the music, you have to be able to make that person that you are interviewing intimate. The audience wants to feel like they know them, and you only have X amount of time. That is really, really hard to do.
Yeah.
I sort of work in I guess I would call it the trenches of public radio. Anna gets to go out and into the field a lot and tell stories. I produce a lot of interviews for our daily show. So every day I'm figuring out what's in the news, who are we going to talk to, what are we going to ask, all the prep that sort of goes into bringing an interview to life on the radio. It's really hard to tell a great story in like 4 minutes, and that's usually what I have to work with every day if I'm producing something for the afternoon show, All Things Considered. But for me, the key to really good storytelling is to do that pre-interview on the phone and fish around and figure out what those little hidden gems are. I'll give you just a quick example. Last year, I produced an interview with a priest in Auburn, Washington, and he was sheltering undocumented immigrants in his church. He was sort of operating this sanctuary church. He was a former ICE agent that spent years arresting undocumented immigrants. He then retired from that job and then became a priest. And one of the details that he shared with me on the phone is that he still carries his federal badge in his wallet. Wow. And I asked him why, and he basically said it was to sort of remind himself where he used to be and how he's changed as a person. He was proud of it in some way, but it reminded him that he had become this different person. And so that detail became a really important part of that interview. And so if you're listening to it, he's telling his story about what he used to do with ICE, what he does now, sheltering immigrants. But then it was this little surprise twist at the end that really kind of spoke to the complicated nature of being a human being, I guess. So anyways, that's my story.
That's a good subject right there.
So with all that being said, connection and being able to listen to and tell a story to one person, even though you're talking to lots, it sounds like it's kind of hard. And I think for those who are not familiar with radio, they might have the stigma of, oh, you have to change your voice and you have to sound a certain way to talk to a certain group of people. But it seems like an overall trend here is really just being your genuine self and connecting with people.
You can't go on the air being Tom Cocaine and not be honest.
So
Really?
hey, speaking of Tom Cocaine, your job as a host is to really engage with listeners and to really connect with them. So how do you even do that?
Well, it takes a lot of effort. It took a long time, I think, for me to get to that point. Because this was a question that was given to me before this, and I thought a lot about it. I really don't have a solid answer, but the way that I was taught how to do it was, one, you have to talk like you're talking to a single person. Because it's a really weird job being a host. I'm in a studio all by myself with a piece of electronic equipment that I'm talking to by myself, but I have to imagine that I'm talking to you individually as a mass group. That's a weird job. And so one way to do that was I was taught is that put a picture of someone who you are talking to in front of you, and that's one way. So you talk to that photo. I used to talk to my sister and just talk to that person. And another way is to also feel comfortable. So I used to take off my shoes to do that and to talk with my shoes off and talk to my sister. So I'm comfortable.
Is that what that was?
Yes. Yeah. It's so in your mind, you have to imagine that you're talking to a single person. And another way to get to that point is to pretend you're talking on the phone, because you're basically just talking on the phone in a microphone. You're talking to one person. So one of the things I used to do was actually have, like back in the day when you had the old landline phone, I used to pick it up and just talk to it, but talking to the microphone. And so that gives you an intimacy that you're only talking to one person through that. And so that gives me a real idea instead of trying to think like, oh my God, I'm talking to 25,000 people, or at the time like 3. But it's it's how it is, and that's how I do it. But and sometimes you get away from it and you become an announcer. There's a big difference between announcing and communicating, right. And that communicating is one-to-one. Announcing is coming up next. It's Homer Simpson playing third base. That's an announcer. But someone who communicates is talking to you and saying, Homer Simpson, third base, he's been there for a long time, telling you a little bit about that, but communicating instead of just announcing it.
So, Andy, you are not so much on the air, but you're still producing content. You're pumping it out every single day. So a lot of what goes into radio is the writing for it. How do you connect with people through writing?
Oh boy, the writing question. So if many folks here have maybe worked for the Daily Evergreen or worked in print in some way, with radio, you have to write these short, simple, declarative sentences. And when you first transition to it, because I did a little bit of print before I got into radio, it's kind of weird. I'm used to using commas in print and writing these sentences that are like a little more flowery. In radio, it's one quick sentence per line, and when you're constrained, sometimes it means that you're forced to be creative. And so that's where, as a producer, I write all the intros and the outros for the interviews I produce. So that's where you might throw in some sound to try to break it up. So it's like a quick sentence, sort of giving you the news, going online and finding some creative sound as sort of like a clip of the person talking or a news report, and trying to sort of make it come together that way. But it's a little challenging at first, but once you get used to it, you quit fretting over the fact that your copy seems too simple, because if you're listening to something on the radio, it has to be simple. People have to be able to follow one thought to the next. And I've heard some bad copy on the radio before, and all of a sudden I'll be confused, and then the story starts, and I'm like, wait, what are they talking about? So yeah, it's a simple, clean style that just takes practice.
If I, just to add on to that, something else, Bill, he talks about short sentences, and part of that is because you have to breathe in between those. So, if you read like a whole paragraph here on this and then try to take a breath in there, so keep them short and simple, especially for an announcer like myself, you get those short sentences are good and nothing too complicated.
So you're not huffing and puffing like the wolf.
Yeah.
And I would add, Angela's really good at this, to your personality in radio can come through, because as a correspondent, or if you're a reporter, you're able to kind of put a little bit of yourself into the story, which is a little bit different than newspaper writing. You still have your pen, and when you're writing newspaper, you still have a voice, but in radio, you actually hear your voice, so you can be a little more yourself. And really finding that resonance within yourself and your own vernacular brings life to that story. So I know that Angela really loves to make puns, and she loves to play with wordplay. And for myself, I like to be a little more casual when I talk. I like to bring some of my rural background into my stories. And I think that that's really important, to be within yourself. And just finding that voice often takes years. I don't think I arrived at it when I first began in radio. I think it's a couple years in that I started to hit my pace. And I think it just takes time to center your voice a little bit as a young person. And so don't be afraid of that. Try different things out and see how it feels, and just keep playing with your voice until you kind of solidly solidify into, who am I when I write?
I think the crucial thing here, though, is personality is important. I think as you do it in retrospect, I mean, I'm lucky enough to host my own show, and I'm lucky enough to have a lot of autonomy. Sometimes the program manager will call me up and say, okay, probably not a good idea to play Utah Phillips saying "God damn" when you have rural listeners at 9 in the morning. You might want to wait until 11 in the morning. And some things like that. But I think it's very, very important to understand that we're still here to convey something. And there have been times when I have gotten in the way of the mission of Inland Folk. It's Inland Folk with Dan Marr. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's Dan Marr's Inland Folk. And this whole personality thing is really cool, because it's where it's at. But at the same time, there's a reason why you're doing what you're doing, and you have to balance out that mission or that goal or that objective or whatever with who and what you are. And again, that's the hard part. It's so easy to get in the way of who and what you're doing. Anna does such a nice job. Tom does, and Tom's so restricted just by the fact he gets like 40 seconds to do this and 30 seconds to do this, and I couldn't do it. I don't think I could do that. But it's the mission. It's why you're there that really counts, and who you are is a part of that. It's not secondary, but it's a component of why you're there.
Looks like we had a question from Nadine Sumerkui, and I'll repeat it so our Facebook listeners can also hear.
How do you guys get started, or how would you recommend us starting? Like for me, like I know you guys talking about sports, but I want to get into sports radio. So I guess how would you start to get into radio jobs now?
I got an answer for you. KUGR.
Yep.
Like KUGU.
Yeah, man, that's a great start. I mean,
Yep.
when I started, it was cable radio. I mean, and seriously, if we had a listener, I was happy. Yeah. Yeah.
And just to clarify,
no, you have listeners.
The question was,
you have
how do you
listeners.
get started in radio?
Yeah, and it's just do that and keep at it. Because right now you've got places that have a college radio station in any form, you are so lucky. I mean, really, take advantage of that. Anybody, I highly suggest it. I mean, it's really open. I worked with the station manager, her name, Catherine Barner, and she is fantastic. She's really a great woman, and she does a lot of things. And it's really open playing field. You can, I mean, for years, I don't know if they still do the basketball games and the baseball games and the volleyball games. What do you want? I mean, you want to get a start? You want to be a broadcaster? Do you want to do play-by-play? They want you. They need you. And what part of that do you want to do? I mean, when I started, I did overnights. I did 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. just playing Sammy Hagar. You know, and yeah. There's
Well,
nothing
the
wrong.
thing
Don't diss Sammy.
Yeah. The thing about sports is it's so accessible, though. There's so, especially in a college campus, there's so much of it, and the sports information. Tom's right. No, I mean he's right. Sports, especially because of the diversity and the mobility of sport. You know what I mean? You've got it made in the shade if you work with the right sports information people. And KUGR, again, they emphasize that sports stuff a lot. And that you know, the local announcers out here on the commercial radio stations like Z-Fun and KQQ, QQQ, they want the local people to at least do the breaks in the sports and that kind of thing. It's much more accessible than a lot of areas of news and entertainment. So,
Well, and beyond sports, I think I would like to put in a plug for Northwest Public Broadcasting here on campus in the Murrow building. They have many opportunities for internships and for, kind of these jobs that you can transition into more and more responsibility as you go through your schooling. And KOW in Seattle also has opportunities for interns and for people to pick up. So if you're looking for opportunity and you're a hard worker, you just need an introduction and you need a resume to kind of put in front of somebody and say, hey, I'll do it. Whatever it is, I'll do it. And get your foot in the door. And then after you get your foot in the door, kind of scramble around, see where the holes are, and see what you could do that you could further your career within that station. And as you get to know those people, your circle constantly keeps broadening and more opportunities present themselves. You just need those first couple of introductions. And if you don't have that, we're all on LinkedIn, we're all on email. You guys can find us and you can start, just start.
Can I chime in here too? So I'd like to make a little plug for KZUU, the other college radio station here.
alternative.
So that's how I got started. I walked in there one day, put in an application, and my first show was a 2 to 6 a.m. on Sunday morning, technically Saturday night, so I would stay up all night on Saturday, go out and, hang out with my friends or whatever, and then go in at 2 o'clock, do my show, and then sleep it off until the Seahawks game was on or something. But the other thing, too, is that my first paying job in radio was right here at Northwest Public Broadcasting. I walked in, I was a volunteer for their pledge drive, and then I ended up getting hired as a board op. And for like 2 or 3 years as a student, I just worked there, and they finally let me talk on the radio, and then I was filling in on the weekends. And before I knew it, when I graduated in 2004, I sort of stuck around Pullman that summer, and then I got hired full-time to be the weekend edition host and then the fill-in host for morning and afternoon. So, that's how I got my start, and I would just echo what Anna's saying. I know a lot of young folks in Seattle who are, college age or whatever, and it's hard to get those opportunities in a big city. Right. Everyone is competing to get the internship at KUOW or the volunteer spot. Here in Pullman, there are real opportunities to do stuff, and I say take advantage of them because they're out there for you.
Okay, and speaking of that, I'm like, we've mentioned basically 3 stations. You have 4 stations here. You've got KUGR, you've got KZUU, you've got Northwest Public Broadcast, you've got KGEM, the jazz station here run by students, and you've got Northwest Public Broadcasting, basically the professional, if you want to call it that, the professional organization that oversees a lot of this. So you can start off, if you don't know what you want to do, I highly suggest KUGR. And Sue Ann Ramella is over here, and she's basically the person in charge of KUGR, and highly suggest you talk to her. She's great. And there's so much opportunity for you to do whatever it is that there's so many niches for you to put in. I mean, you like rock, you like jazz, you like sports, you like news. It's all right there for you. This university, if you want to come into radio, this is the place to start. You've got all your opportunity right here. It doesn't get better than this, seriously.
And just starting and muddling around a bit is it's really good for you, because you might start in sports and you'd be like, whoa, I didn't know that I really enjoy news a lot better, and I'll take a side of sports, but I want to go into news. You just have to muddle around a little bit and try to see what resonates with you. What do you want to drill down on? And just let yourself be open to the experience for a while, because you're young and you have that time to kind of just feel things out a little bit and be like, do I like print? Do I like radio? Do I like news? Do I like music? Do I like hosting? Do I like, anchoring? What is it that I like to do? And then your career will obviously probably present you with multiple opportunities to grow in all those areas. But the broader experience you can get at the base when you're starting, the more you're able to pyramid up later in your career.
And listen to yourself. Do air checks.
No.
And when you listen to yourself, don't try and be something that you're not. As you listen to yourself and as you grow, you'll begin to be more familiar with what you can be and what you don't even know you can be. That's the key. It's an ever-growing potential. It's wonderful. We spend a lot of time on our limitations, and really we are very limited in our limitations. We don't have a lot. And I think it's really crucial that you understand that as you grow, you have to be the one ultimately that takes responsibility. I mean, managers and people do air checks with you, and they'll say what you should and shouldn't be and play by the rules and all this kind of thing, and that's as it is. But the bottom line is you are you, and eventually that is what really counts in radio.
Hear, hear.
So speaking of that growth, and we'll get to your question in a minute or so, radio is growing. Like a lot of the mediums we've seen, we're digitizing ourselves a lot more than we ever have before and stuff. So to the panel, and maybe we'll start with Andy, who's had a lot of experience in one specific area. You know where I'm going with this. How has radio changed? How is it changing? And how does it make you feel?
Oh, me? Okay.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about this on the way over here. 10 years ago, if somebody would have asked me, hey, should I pursue radio as a career, I might have sort of hesitated and been like, well, there's not a lot of jobs. It's not necessarily sinking, but it's not growing. Well, podcasting, as you all know, has kind of changed the game. If you're interested in pursuing audio, you sort of come to the right place. As not to sort of knock on newspapers, but a lot of traditional media, they're shedding jobs, they're shrinking. Radio is growing. Public radio specifically is growing. The station I work at, KUOW, over the last few years, I mean, we've added dozens of staffers. We've beefed up our programming.
And just to add to that is that something like, say, 5 years ago was unthinkable. KUOW was the #1 station in Seattle. The #1, it's a public radio station. That's unheard of 5 years ago. You just never, it was like KMPS, a country music station. And now it's not.
So just to, yeah, and it's pretty amazing what's happened. And just to sort of wrap up my thought, public radio has sort of shifted its thinking to some extent of, when I go into work, I don't necessarily think I work for a radio station. I try to think I work for a media company. We do a lot of stuff. We don't just do stories and interviews that you listen to on the air, but we produce podcasts, we have an app, all of our content goes online, or we have Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all the sort of relevant social media channels to get the content out there. And I think it's really smart that radio has sort of transitioned into thinking of itself as media companies, not just, oh, we produce radio stories that you hear once and then they sort of disappear into the ether. All the content I produce, I mean, anyone could go online and sort of look at the archive of the different interviews. It's, everything sort of lives online. And the growth of podcasting is, I mean, I don't even know where it's going to go. It's pretty amazing what's happening. So I guess just to finish up here, I think you're in the right place if you want to pursue audio. It's an industry that's growing, and even outside of public radio, there's opportunities at private companies that solely just produce podcasts, and they're profitable and growing.
Earwolf.
And it's incredibly fun work. It's bright and it's hard and it's gritty, and it's like you get super tired. Like, as a correspondent, my job is to go into the field and drag out news as best I can out of, really hard situations. But it's so gratifying when you finally chase down that story, or when you finally get that sound. I once spent 3 days on my stomach chasing a ground squirrel to try and get it to squeak. And the stupid thing would go down a hole, and then I would mic that hole and it would pop up in another hole like that, and it was like Wile E. Coyote. I was just like, oh my God, please squeak. And so after I finally got that little thing to squeak, I finally put this lavalier mic next to the hole, and then I backed away from it. And then it drug my lav, which was like a $400 lav, down into its hole. And I was like, oh no. And so, but I mean, that's the kind of adventures that you get in public radio. You chase squirrels, you chase wildfire, you can just do some amazing, incredible work. And it's just so gratifying to do that. And like Andy said, there's so much possibility. There's so many possibilities for young people to get into radio, or mid-career people to get into radio that have chops in other areas.
What does a squirrel squeak sound like? Can you imitate that? There we go.
Wow. Well done.
So, Dan, I'd really like to get your opinion on this, because you're someone who's been in the industry for 35 plus years, and you've definitely been able to feel the changes. So what have you taken away from all of it?
Well, when that was 1982 we started, and everybody's dead now.
No, Dan, no.
It's so interesting to me that an audio medium can stay audio in this day and age when everything is so visual. When you think about how and what we do on a daily basis, that when we look at emojis, and on my cell phone it goes da 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 emoji da 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 da, and we're conditioned by visuals. We're wired into visual, and to me it's so amazing that throughout all of this, and when I first started, we had these big reel-to-reel tapes that we would put the show on, and there were three of these huge 12-inch reels, and we would send it up to Spokane on the bus, and they would pick it up. And then we went to digital audio tape, and now it's totally computer. It's totally sent by electronics, but it's still audio. And I think the real change is in how we convey that audio, as everybody has said. Over and over and over, people keep saying, Dan, you need to do a podcast. You need to get into the millennium, Dan. And they're correct. I just think that this whole thing is so rife for new audio experience. Do you remember back in the 80s and 90s, and they were coming up with all these headphones that were head-shaped, and they would have all these different things that would like go right into your brain, and the stereo would do this and this and this and all that. That doesn't even matter, really. That's for audio. What really matters is how people can continually connect with this audio thing. And more and more, they're walking around with buds and things like that, and they're running into me because they're not watching where they're going. But they're still listening. That's the key, folks. They're still listening. The other change is, and I don't want to get into the music too much, but I started doing the show because I wanted to convey to people why music and certain musics were good, and why certain other people thought other musics were good and were listenable and this kind of thing. More and more, I'm feeling like the realists must have felt when the Impressionists came on board. The whole sound of music in itself is changing, and I have to adjust to that as well. It doesn't please me like the music I listened to in the 60s, but then maybe no generation is totally complacent. Generations have to adjust to these stylistic things and these cultural things. Adjustment generationally is a big deal.
And I would just add, if you want to start in radio, Angela, like, what was that? Phyllis called you and said, please go up to Spokane and do a story for us. And then it hit NPR National the next day. It was like, in a day, Angela went from, working locally here and doing a couple local stories to being on National Public Radio.
Yeah, that was pretty rad, and kind of weird because I was not expecting that at all. And everything that everyone here has been saying is, take advantage of the opportunities and the people that you're connected to. That is so valuable. And say yes. Don't be afraid to say yes, because a lot of life is about risk-taking, right? And sometimes you're going to put yourself in this very uncomfortable situation, like a good uncomfortable situation, but it's, yeah.
Well, you just don't know unless you try.
Boom.
It's the bottom line.
Yeah. And we need, just speaking for Northwest Public Broadcasting, we need news people here. Often there is a demonstration or some sort of news happening in Pullman, and I need somebody to record that tape for us so that we can get it on to the news for Northwest Public Broadcasting, but for the larger network all across the Northwest or the nation. So if you're interested in that, please, start connecting with us, because we train you up to be able to do that sound, and then eventually, if everything's good, like, you can get on the radio that way.
So we have about 5 minutes left here in the session. Looks like we have a question in the crowd.
Yeah, so this year I've kind of dedicated my time to creating content in terms of broadcasting and as well on the radio. For people who maybe don't have enough to get a job right away, what sort of platforms would you guys who are in the industry would recommend for people to put their like radio broadcasts and stuff like that on platforms so that people like you guys can find that and then maybe offer jobs, or maybe not offer jobs, but get to notice those types of people?
So the question for Facebook, hey, it was, how do you get noticed by people in the industry if you're trying to break your way into radio?
Well, one is we're not going out and finding it. I mean, I don't have time. I don't think our program director has time to actually go and search for it. Although I will say that there are many people who have gone on to radio that started in podcast. Who they are, I don't know, but I know it's an area from which that talent is drawn. But it's basically if there's somebody had said once, if it's not online, it doesn't exist. Although that's not true, but if what you are trying to produce. When you say content, do you mean like, what is content? I mean, that's
like a 2-hour radio broadcast.
a 2-hour radio broadcast. I'm sorry, there's like all of a sudden all these thoughts got into my head. But when it comes to that much content, and if you're trying to get people to listen to it, or especially producers, and if it's like music interspersed, I just want to hear you. So that has to do a lot with making your tape, as they call it, right? So I just want to hear you. I want to hear the interstitials, like basically how is it that you perform? And you just got to send it out there. And another way to do it is to go there. I tell you what, there's no better way to get a job than to show up. If you show up, who was it? Our last morning edition host basically just hung out. I'm not kidding. He hung out. He had radio chops, but he didn't have a job, and we didn't have a job for him. But he just hung out at the station. He was there probably a couple hours every day, and he's like, "Oh, what needs to be done?" I mean, he took out the garbage for us. I mean, seriously, that's the way you get started, because we get to know you, and now suddenly you're not just some guy who has audio content on the web. And I'm like, who's this guy? I don't know. Maybe I hear it, maybe I don't. I get 30 seconds of it, and I'm out of there. But you've got to put it in people's hands. You can't just let somebody come to you. There's not a lot that's doing that. There are maybe some people who are talent scouts that are going out there looking for that, but usually it's somebody gets it to their hand. You got to get it to them somehow. If it's sending mass email, they send mass email. It's somehow, some way, somebody's going to listen to it. It's kind of like dating. It's a numbers game. That's the way it is. I mean, it's like you think that the first person you're going to meet is going to be the love of your life. It doesn't happen that way. You got to find 20 different numbers and get them out there.
Speak for yourself, dude.
I'll chime in on this one. So it sounds like you're looking for a way to kind of build an audio portfolio. I've seen people do this, and I don't know how much time it would take, but if you could build a simple website using like a WordPress or something like that, you can often host that audio on SoundCloud that you can embed. So that's a pretty simple way to just get your portfolio out there, and then you can send that link to people, or you can sort of try to build a social media presence to sort of get people to click on that. If you're interested in going the public radio route, there's a great website and podcast creator called prx.org, the Public Radio Exchange. They allow independent producers to upload content to their radio stories, interviews, whatever kind of found sound, whatever's you want to put out there, and then public radio stations around the country can then download your content and air it if they deem it sort of good enough, or if it fits into their format. A lot of major public radio players use PRX. This American Life is an example. Like, they're distributed through PRX, but it's also
XM carries PRX as well.
Yeah, but it's a serious platform for independent producers to get their content, and I think there is a membership fee or something like that. But that's a good way to get your stuff out there if you're interested in public radio content.
Listen to Andy.
And editing yourself is critically important, because this is the only thing that people have to like look at you. And so, like, Angela played a minute and a half of sound. That went by pretty quick. We got 4 people in it. So when you're editing yourself, make sure that you edit yourself as tightly as that. I'd say nobody's going to listen to more than 1:30 of you. And if they're not in for you there, they're just going on. So make sure that first minute pops, and that you maybe have 3 very tightly honed examples of your best work, and then just let the rest flow away, because you can talk about that later. You're just trying to get in the door. And I would say that all of the jobs that I have gotten have basically been from walking in the door and being like, I'm Anna King, you got to hire me. I'm here, I want it. What are we doing? Give me a pickup. So, if you can do that, I took a cross-country road trip to get my jobs in newspaper. So I stopped at every newspaper from Tacoma all the way to Kennewick, and I just said, hey, you got to hire me. And then a couple papers offered me a job. I took out, that's how you get in the door. You just go find out who the editor is, write your letters, write your resumes, put them all in packets, hit the road, go get a job.
since we have so little time left, if I might, and that's how I got my job. I walked into radio and said, "Hi, I'm Anna King. I want this job."
Give me a pickup.
Anyway, and it seemed to work. One of the things you're going to find if you're in radio, at least in my experience, is the sense of commitment to radio, not even necessarily to the station you work for, which your sense of loyalty to that station is up there. But I think you'll find, once you make that step and once you get involved, once you do what our morning edition host did, once you start to make those inroads, you're going to find that in radio, the commitment level to radio, whatever it is interpreted to be, is very, very, very high. I've even seen people that originally wanted to go into TV production, they go into radio, and for some reason they stay in it. And that is really cool. I look at Andy Hurst, for example, who was my advisee, and even from way back in 2002, 2001, his commitment to that little station was way, way, way up there. And he didn't get anything from it except just being on the air for 2 hours, 3 hours, 2 to 6, 4 hours.
I think I got like 1 credit.
Yeah.
Independent study.
I had to sign for it though, dude. But so what I'm saying is, I think that is, to me, one of the ultimate residuals and results is that when you're part of it, you'll really see what commitment to a concept really means, is commitment to radio. That is an awesome, awesome thing.
All right. Well, we have one very, very quick question.
It's not a question, it's a statement.
Statement.
If you're interested in an internship with Northwest Public Broadcasting, the deadline to get that in is April 2nd. And in the career field of radio, it's not just about being an announcer on the air. There are also support staff. There are people who create graphics for us, people who help us with our IT, web. So whatever talents you may have, it may fit in the radio medium. You don't just have to be talent. Talent needs support too. And that's
All right. So applications for Northwest Public Broadcasting are due on April 2nd. Check that out online. Thank you so much to the panel for being here, and thank you to all of you. Again, look them up online. Learn how to spell cocaine. Connect on LinkedIn. Thank you, everyone. Happy symposium.
Thank you.
Thanks.